Whenever we talk of jihadis, some people reach for hot toddies. But deny all you like, jihad attacks still spike. And David Wood's here to help us count the bodies. Ladies and gentlemen, it's This Week in Jihad, the award-winning smash hit television series, coming to you live. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and all that. We have the great David Wood with us, as we always do on such occasions. David, how are you?
Hello, Robert. This is your publisher, wondering why your new book. Why is your new book not ready yet, Robert? Because I spent all week working on my new poem for the beginning of the show.
The new book, David, in point of fact, is absolutely on schedule, and I am set to finish it and turn it in at the beginning of the year 2023. And we are on track to do that. It's very exciting. It's a history of the Byzantine Empire. Lots of jihad in it, of course, because those guys never gave up and ultimately won out. At least so far. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of jihad tonight. David, where do you think we should start? With the stupid infidels or with Iran or what?
So many different places to start.
Or with the active violence,
Or with the latest awesome converts.
Yeah.
I just posted a short one yesterday. I could do this endlessly from all this stuff that this dude Andrew Tate has said about Islam, but I posted a clip of him saying, ISIS are the ones who are actually following the book. If you're pointing at them going, no, they're not. No, I don't interpret it that way. That's because you're a fake Muslim. And it's like,
whoops.
My goodness. So I got that. I got him saying, I got a clip of him saying that covering a woman's face dehumanizes her.
Well, yeah.
But now he supports a religion that calls for it and so on. So there's these endless clips of this dude. And
you know what else? We could also start with Sheikh Uthman and the latest on him. Did you see Dexter Van Zyle's piece and Focus on Western Islamism? The latest.
Did not.
Okay, this is great. They it seems that Uthman said, "Oh, San Diego? Did you say San Diego? I didn't report it in San Diego. I reported it somewhere else." So in San Diego County, but not in the city. And so the San Diego County said, "We have no record of any hate crime involving this man as a victim." And Ibrahim Hooper of the famed Council on American Islamic Relations got involved and said he was going to have a discussion with Sheikh Uthman and then they would issue a statement. But that's been several days. Dexter Van Zyle of Focus on Western Islamism has been calling, emailing, trying to contact Ibrahim Hooper every which way. No comment, no further remarks from either of them.
Well, I mean, I can predict what'll happen. I mean, and again, to be fair, there could be something that everyone is just totally missing here, and Sheikh Uthman is going to come out with some great evidence, but probably going to be something like, "Oh, you thought when I said San Diego County, I meant San Diego County. I really meant Antarctica. That's where I reported it." And then if Antarctica doesn't work, "Oh, yeah, I reported it on Mars. And prove me wrong. You can't prove that I'm a liar. I did report it on Mars. Prove me wrong." And we won't be able to prove him wrong until Elon Musk, sets up camp there.
It's a beautiful thing, really. It's a beautiful thing. All right. I think we got so many stupid infidels. It's a shame because, per your instructions, David, I just want everyone to know that David Wood has instructed me on this every step of the way. I am just a scribbler. I know nothing. And he said, give each week's episode a different title so that people know it's a new one. And I thought, well, that makes a whole lot of sense. So last week, I called it Stupid Infidels Edition. And this week is an Avalanche of Stupid Infidels story. stories. So I'm gonna have to think of another title. If you have another title, ladies and gentlemen, you can give it to us in the comments. But in any case, let us start with, in terms of stupid infidels, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, in the United States. And they have some problems with some of these Afghan refugees, notably Mohammed Tariq. I believe we discussed Mohammed Tariq sometime before in one of our famed earlier episodes. Mohammed Tariq came, David, to the United States from Afghanistan and pleaded guilty to fondling a 3-year-old girl at a camp in Virginia where he was being prepared to be released into the larger population. Where do you think he might have gotten the idea that such behavior was justified?
I mean, didn't his prophet literally say that? Why do you prefer matrons and not have a preference for fondling virgins?
There you go. So Mohammed Tariq, however, cannot be deported. Because where are you going to send him? You're going to send him to the Taliban? No. The United States government is not going to send somebody back to the Taliban whom the Taliban might kill. And what are you going to do? Keep him in prison just indefinitely? No. And so Tom Homan, the former director of ICE, said that what's going to happen to Mohammed Tariq and others like him is that fairly soon they will be released out onto the streets of the United States.
And that's happened. I mean, that's just not just happening with guys like him. I mean, that's something that's ongoing, even with people who joined ISIS. Mm-hmm. If the various governments of the world don't have evidence on what people did there, and all they know is that they went and joined ISIS and were there for a while, and then wanted to come back to their countries, they just charge them with something like providing material support or something like that, and they give them like 7 or 10 years. And what that means, you have ISIS jihadis regularly being released back onto the streets of their countries over the next several years, and this is wild stuff. You know what's really, really creepy about the fondling the 3-year-old. So this is something that is put out by Muhammad himself. Mm-hmm. And when someone says, "Hey, I'm marrying a grown woman," Muhammad was actually confused. What are you talking? Why wouldn't you not? Why don't you mm-hmm. have a preference for fondling virgins? But think about that. Notice you should be marrying someone you're going to fondle as a virgin. But think about that. That's not someone you're thinking of like just instantly having sex with, because she wouldn't be a virgin anymore. You wouldn't be fondling her at all. You'd have sex with her, and then she's no longer a virgin. And then what are you doing? What are you doing fondling her? Mm-hmm. And what's crazy is when you read the Muslim sources, and so there is this issue of Muhammad marrying Aisha when she's 6 or 7, and then consummating the marriage when she's 9.
Right.
And there are all sorts of possible things going on here. Like there's a story. So Muhammad was proposing the marriage shortly before they left Mecca for Medina and so on. And then Aisha apparently got sick and her hair fell out when they got to Medina. And then it says, they waited for her hair to grow down to her ears before Muhammad had sex with her. So there could be all kinds of reasons that Muhammad's waiting. Maybe he just doesn't like, little bald child bride.
That's going to be the name of my next book, Little Bald Child Bride.
Yeah. What many Muslim apologists will say is, he was waiting for her to reach puberty. Mm-hmm. When no, he wasn't. There's one, the Quran doesn't say you need to wait till she reaches puberty. And 2, the Muslim sources themselves say that she hadn't reached puberty. It's why she was allowed to continue playing with dolls. She hadn't reached puberty, so she was allowed to continue playing with dolls in the presence of Muhammad and so on. So that explanation doesn't work. And the best case scenario, if you actually read the sources, so you're not making stuff up like, oh, she reached puberty. If you're not making anything up and you just go with what the Muslim sources say and you try to be as charitable as possible, you get something like this. They're not waiting for puberty. They're waiting until a man can insert his penis into her, right? And sometimes they just seem too small for that, and like a prophet can't get it in there. And so
Yes.
that's it looks like that's where the fondling comes
Hmm.
in. And what the fondling actually is you marry a girl who's way too young, 5 or 6, and you're constantly sort of playing around with her in bed to see when she's ready to where
The
you can
thigh.
finally, yeah, to see where you can finally get into her. And then as soon as you can, then okay, now she moves in with you permanently, and she's your bride, and then you have sex with her, and you're done with the fondling a virgin. Now you're just fondling your wife, and so
And
it's really, really,
that's your indication that she reached puberty.
yeah.
So it's all okay.
So creepy, creepy stuff.
Okay, so let's go to Canada. Speaking of creepy, creepy stuff, we have Cecile Rousseau. I don't know if you can see. Can you see the screen, David? Because
I can if I go over to the YouTube page.
okay. So we have Cecile Rousseau. There she is, and she is a psychiatrist involved in efforts to support children of Canadian women detained in Syria. A pediatric psychiatrist at McGill University in Canada, and an expert, they say, on violent radicalism and extremism. There she is, an expert on violent radicalism and extremism. And she says that she believes that we should, or that Canada should, hurry and bring back women and children detained in ISIS camps in Syria. And that the longer we wait to repatriate these women and children, the worse it will be. She says they're Canadian citizens. Let's have them back home. That's the best outcome for them and for us. Now, certainly for some of them, that's absolutely true. The problem is when you have ISIS's record of training even the youngest of children to be jihadis, the cubs of the caliphate, and so on. She's asking Canadians to take a substantial risk, is she not, David?
Oh, absolutely. And it's the same thing with any of these other issues where you've got people like with taking in immigrants from Afghanistan. Yeah, I know there are plenty of people there who just want to get out of there, who can't stand the Taliban and would love to live anywhere else. But there are also people who, like the guy you just talked about, are maybe not planning to terrorize people, but they have some really creepy ideas about what you could do with kids and what you can do to unbelievers and stuff like that, and what they're supposed to do when their sisters or daughters get out of line and don't follow Islam properly. And then, of course, you have just straight up jihadis who, hey, let me see if I can get on this list to come to the United States or UK, and then join up with the local group and start figuring out how we can terrorize these guys. And the unanimous consensus of Western leaders seems to be that's a risk we're willing to take.
Yep. No problem. Because they don't, of course, take it. They live in gated communities. They have guards. It's the ordinary people in the country who are taking the risk, and they just don't seem to care about that at all.
No,
Let's
they do not.
go
Oh,
to
hey,
yes, sir.
one second. I don't know if you were going to. I don't know if you're going to cover this, but
What you got?
because you just meant I had an article already pulled up because I was thinking about making a video about it. But the title is "Family Details Horrific Abuse at Hands of Female ISIS Leader as Judge Weighs 20-Year Sentencing."
No, I don't have that.
So Alison Fluke Ekren allegedly forced her 13-year-old daughter to marry an ISIS terrorist. And just reading the story about this woman, I'll just read a little excerpt here. Family members of a convicted ISIS battalion leader detailed extensive physical and sexual abuse as a judge weighs sentencing, according to a court filing. Kansas native
There's Alison Fluke Ekren. There she is on the screen, ladies and gentlemen.
Kansas native Alison Fluke Ekren, 42, faces a possible 20-year sentence for her crimes, which include providing material support to Islamic State. She pleaded guilty to terrorism charges after admitting she led the Kataba Nusayba, an all-female battalion of the Islamic State comprised of around 100 women and girls. This group includes some members as young as 10 who learned to use automatic weapons, grenades, and suicide belts. So this woman spent her time training 10-year-olds 10-year-old girls to be suicide bombers against their enemies. And it says the sentencing may rely on the cruelty of the things she did. She was brainwashed young girls and trained them to kill. She carved a path of terror. This is statements by the attorney. She carved a path of terror, plunging her own children into unfathomable depths of cruelty by physically, psychologically, emotionally, and sexually abusing them. And I mean, you read some of the descriptions of the sort of people who are attracted to the Islamic State. One of her daughters said her mother would, quote, beat my body, leaving my muscles cramping in agony. She would then go to her room and masturbate over the fact that she beat me. I could hear her from the other room. So
Oh my
this woman
goodness.
beats her daughter brutally and then goes and masturbates because it sexually arouses her to be beaten. And, you know, these are this is the woman who becomes a leader in ISIS. And notice the maximum sentence for this stuff that she's done, training girls to become suicide bombers, training girls to become use AK-47s and so on, being an ISIS battalion leader, horribly abusing her own children, giving her children to ISIS jihadis, marrying multiple terrorists, and so on. And she's facing 20 years, which means she's coming home, folks.
Yep.
She's coming home.
And people like Cecile Rousseau in Canada are working to bring people like Alison Fluke Ekren and their children back to the West. What could possibly go wrong?
Nothing.
Exactly. Meanwhile,
and the attitude always seems to be, but you know, it's down the road, so let's just sweep it under the rug and let the next generation deal with these psychos.
that's right. That's what's going to happen too. You know, ultimately, these issues will become impossible to ignore and to avoid. Anyway, David, our friend Ibn Warraq, the great ex-Muslim author of many books, including Which Quran, What the Quran Really Says, The Quest for the Historical Muhammad, Why I Am Not a Muslim, which was a book that was a great influence on me back in the 90s. He wrote a book a few years back called The Islam and Islamic Terrorism. And it is subtitled The Importance of Beliefs, Ideas, and Ideology. It's a very straightforward, sober, clear, well-written exposition of how Islamic theology informs jihad violence, which is really a fairly elementary point that you and I have made hundreds of times.
It seems like something that people should want to know about. I mean, if it were any other group in the world, if it were MAGA people terrorizing and shouting, you know, MAGA Akbar or something like that, then they would instantly want to look into the ideology and say, what is convincing these guys to go on a killing spree? And so if you have all these people shouting Allahu Akbar and quoting passages from the Muslim sources and posting why they're doing this stuff, and I mean, sometimes like when they chopped off Lee Rigby's head in the UK, that guy actually stopped to do interviews and was explaining from the Quran why he did this. And so, yeah, obviously, everyone should be totally fine with Ibn Warraq finally, you know, breaking down what's going on here.
Yeah, except Amazon has just banned the book. Now, this is very strange because it was there for 5 years. This book came out in 2017. But suddenly, for some reason, some low-level Amazon fascist decided we can't have this kind of thing getting out. I mean, he doesn't know there's probably 200 other books that say much the same things, although not written as elegantly as Ibn Warraq can write. But nonetheless, you can still get this material. But The Islam and Islamic Terrorism is no longer available at Amazon. I'm happy to say, however, that when the news broke, it became, you can see it up here, a bestseller at Barnes & Noble, and actually was number 73 out of all the books in the world, which is very, very good at Barnes & Noble the last time I looked. So it kind of this attempt at censorship kind of backfired, but it's astonishing that it was made at all.
Yeah, it is, because I mean, think, as you pointed out, it's either, you know, some person who works at Amazon complaining or them getting complaints from outside, but wherever it's coming from, it's the same thing. oh, I'm a Muslim, and it's really terrifying to me that you're selling material that's calling for violence against us. Like, wait a minute, no, it's exposing the source of violence of jihadis. What in the world are you talking about, Robert? I have probably 5 or 6 books from Ibn Waraq, and I don't have that particular one, but I'm guessing there's no calls to violently subjugate and slaughter Muslims in there. Am I right?
Nary one. I don't know.
Gosh,
Do you know Ibn Waraq, David?
never met.
Well, I am honored to be able to say he's a good friend. He's stayed in my house. He's somebody that I've known for years, and he's the gentlest soul I've ever met. Really, a very sweet, gentle guy. The idea that there's anything threatening or hateful in his books is absolutely ridiculous. And he's a great thinker and writer also. His books are very informative and extraordinarily well written. And the Islam and Islamic terrorism is no exception to that.
So just to be clear, he's exposing what Islam has to do with terrorism. Someone obviously complains, hey, we don't feel safe when he's talking about what this religion teaches. And so his book gets removed, even though it's not calling for violence. Meanwhile, the Quran and Hadiths, which say, fight those who do not believe in Allah, and where Muhammad says, I've been commanded to fight people until they say there's no God but Allah, and the sources that say Jews and Christians are the worst of creatures, and that Jews are the vilest in enmity towards the true believers, and so on, and that the end will not come until Muslims kill the Jews, to the point where Jews are hiding behind trees and rocks, and the trees and rocks are saying, here's a Jew behind me, come kill him now. That's all fine, but you can't say anything about it or you'll be banned.
It's also worth noting that Ibn Waraq is an ex-Muslim himself. He was born into a Muslim family, was raised a Muslim, is from Pakistan, and is familiar not only intellectually, not only from study, but from lived experience with the Islamic world and the effects that Islam can have upon individuals and societies. And so his testimony is in every sense unimpeachable. And it's unconscionable for Amazon to have removed his book.
And this is especially disturbing when you think about apostates, right? You and I are under a death sentence for criticizing Islam and Muhammad. Someone like Ibn Waraq and apostate prophet and so on, they're under the same death sentences for criticizing Islam, but they have additional death sentences on them for being apostates. And it's just so absolutely insane to me to say, here's an ideology which, if it ever becomes more popular, more prominent, if they ever get what they want, and people like Ali Dawa, who openly admit as soon as they take power, they're killing all these guys, you're not allowed to say anything in response. You, who are a future potential victim of this ideology, cannot say a word about it, or you have to be banned. It's
right.
Insane.
And if they were to catch up with us and carry out the multiple death threats that we have received, then Ali Dawa and people of that kind will say, well, they had it coming. They brought it on themselves, and so on. And the establishment media will also say the same thing.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see. More stupid infidels. We have United States government yet again. Saifullah Paracha. Saifullah was a Guantanamo inmate, and he had plotted to smuggle nukes into the United States. Now, the problem with the Guantanamo inmates, I understand very well. You're going to keep them there indefinitely, forever? I mean, it's already been 20 years. And they can't decide whether to put them on trial as if they were civilian-type criminals, or military tribunals as if they're soldiers in a war. Ultimately, they did neither with Saifullah Paracha. They sent him back to Pakistan. He is 75 years old, and people say, well, he's 75 years old, he's harmless. But this is a guy who had plotted to set off a nuclear explosion in the United States. And it seems like just facilely sending him back without any protection against him at this point to a state that's increasingly hostile is perhaps running a significant risk.
It's just weird because, I mean, what do you do with it? This is what Islam does. It just leaves you with like no good solution on the table.
Indeed. There's no doubt. I mean, and you're right. There is no good solution because this guy, he's been there since shortly after 9/11, and the situation should have been resolved in some way, whether by a military tribunal or by a civilian court. But just to keep him there for 20 years and then send him home as if nothing happened, it's risky, at very least. Meanwhile, in Germany, one of our favorite places for dealing with jihad activity, we have a 27-year-old Muslim migrant from Afghanistan who attacked his 16-year-old friend and her 36-year-old mother in Speyer with a knife. And in response, the Interior Minister of Germany, Nancy Faeser, said, we need to bring more of these Afghans into the country.
Yeah, see, Robert, because, since the majority are peaceful and it's just a tiny minority of extremists, the more you bring in, the more the extremists will be hopelessly outnumbered by all the peaceful ones. See how that works?
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Yeah, so just bring in millions and millions and millions, and then the violent ones will be really, really outnumbered, and they'll just give up.
Yeah, we've seen that all over the world. That's why the Islamic world is so very peaceful, and why there hasn't been any jihad violence in, my goodness, in centuries now. Anyway, let's go to Britain, and in Britain we have Dr. Keith Wolverson. And Dr. Keith Wolverson is now suspended, Dr. Keith Wolverson, because a Muslim woman wearing a niqab came to see him. And she started to tell him what was her ailment, and he could not understand her, and asked her to take off her face mask so that he could understand her. For that, he has now been suspended from practicing medicine for 9 months.
He should have quoted Andrew Tate that covering someone's face dehumanizes them, and he wants to rehumanize her.
There you go. But Keith Wolverson is an indication of who's in charge now in Britain. He had a perfectly reasonable explanation, perfectly reasonable case. If he's going to treat this lady, he needs to be able to understand what she's saying. And if he can't hear or understand her accent through the cloth, then he asks her to remove the cloth. But Sharia takes precedence now. This is the new Britain. Celebrate diversity. Meanwhile, some good news out of Britain. Adil Khan and Abdul Rauf will finally be deported. Adil Khan and Abdul Rauf were two of the members of one of the most infamous rape gangs in Rochdale in Britain, and they have been scheduled for deportation for years, but have been walking around in the area where they committed the crimes, often terrifying their victims who see them walking around on the streets. But meanwhile, the ringleader of the same gang, what's his name? Abdulaziz. He will not be deported. He will not lose his citizenship and has been allowed to remain in the UK. Once again, what could possibly go wrong?
And just keep in mind that if it weren't for people like you and Pamela Geller and Tommy Robinson and so on, everyone who was calling attention to these attacks, none of these guys probably would have ever gone to trial over this stuff. It's just the entire government and the media were all dead set on covering it up because they were terrified of being called Islamophobes.
And not only covering it up, but the leftist groups, Hope Not Hate, and what's the other one? I've forgotten the name of the other one. The ones that got us banned from the country, they actually had ongoing efforts that they've now scrubbed from their websites to claim that people who said that the rapists were largely Muslim and that this was coming from Islamic theology, that this was a manifestation of Islamophobia and hate that needed to be stamped out. And so they were actively working against the honest reporting of these issues for years. Nick Lowles of Hope Not Hate, and man, I'm getting old, David. I'm forgetting the other guy's name.
Yeah, I know the feeling. But notice it's always the same. It's always the same thing. So you've got 14 centuries of Islamic terror, and then someone writes a book and says, here's why it's happening. And it's, well, you can't report why it's happening because that's Islamophobic. And so we have to get your book banned. And hey, thousands and thousands of young girls are being drugged, raped, gang raped, pimped, and so on by Muslims who some of them are quite happy to explain why they're doing it, and shame on the person who wants to see why they're doing it. It's not, I mean, the person who actually says we need to look at the underlying ideology that makes these guys think that it's completely okay to gang rape little girls, that's the real bad guy. I mean, a person who does that is worse than the guys who are gang raping the little girls, and certainly more of a threat than all these guys with their ideology that convinces them it's okay to drug, pimp, gang rape little girls.
Indeed.
It's just amazing that the real enemies are always the ones who expose it rather than the people who are actually doing it.
Exactly.
And the ideology that gives rise to it.
David, speaking of exposing ideologies, I have a question here on the screen. Guys, which Quran would you recommend I buy? David, do you have any idea what might be a good Quran for this gentleman, Ray Jakes, to buy?
I'd go with the Critical Quran.
I appreciate that. This was not rehearsed, ladies and gentlemen. The Critical Quran is, I don't have one right next to me, is available now. It is a new translation, a clear translation of the clear book with commentary from the Islamic sources, plus variants, all kinds of goodies. There's no Quran like it. It's the only Quran you need. Get the Critical Quran, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, back to the stupid infidels. David, in France, there's always stupid infidel stories out of France.
Always.
The stupid infidel story in this case is a man in France entering the Saint Jean Baptiste Church in Mantes-la-Jolie. And he started to loudly pray Islamic prayers inside this church. The parish priest was forced to call the police to remove the man so that calm could be restored. But then the parish priest said, look, don't get excited about this. It's just mental illness.
It always is.
It always is. But what is the significance of his praying Islamic prayers in this church?
That's what all insane people do.
Now it's a mosque. Now, because he has prayed Islamic prayers in it, it now belongs to Islam. It's unlikely that anybody is going to go and claim it on that basis, but that may have been the idea that he had when he decided to go into this church and start praying prayers. The pattern for this comes from the story of Sophronius, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, at the time of the conquest of Jerusalem in the late 630s. And the Caliph Umar, according to this story, which admittedly dates from the 9th century and probably is not historically reliable, but it is a very famous and important story. Sophronius showed Umar around Jerusalem and invited him to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But Umar magnanimously declined, according to the story, and said, "If I go in and pray, my followers will claim it for a church. So I'm going to not go in and leave it for you Christians."
That's nice.
Yeah, it didn't happen, but it's nice. Okay, another story of stupid infidels. The stupid infidel in question is an LGBT campaigner out of Britain named Peter Tatchell. Tatchell, I don't know. But he went to Qatar because Qatar is hosting the World Cup. And he started to protest against the discrimination against gays that is going on during the World Cup. And he was duly stopped by the Qatari government, which is only to be expected. But apparently Peter Tatchell himself did not expect it, because he's probably got his head full of nonsense about how Islam is tolerant and pluralistic. And so he figured he could go and protest against government policies with no trouble whatsoever.
It is interesting that in Islam always seems to play both sides of the fences on every issue, so that whatever you happen to believe, Muslim dawagandists can say, that's what you believe. Well, that's what Islam is. So if you're a feminist, then Muhammad is the greatest feminist who ever lived. Convert to Islam. If you hate feminism and you want to press, Islam is the only religion that knows how to keep women in their places. If you're pro LGBTQ stuff, then hey, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Keith Ellison, they're far left. They're totally with you. If you're against that, Islam is the only religion that can stand up against LGBTQs, blah, 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 and so on. It's like, whatever you happen to believe, we've got a religion for you.
That's absolutely true. That's also actually playing out in this very same story about Peter Tatchell and his adventures in Qatar, because Qatar is the home base of Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera, as a network, generally tends to follow the woke Western line. And so it's completely pro-LGBTQ and pro-everything else that the Western left is for. And Peter Tatchell may have been misled by that and thought that he could go to Qatar and appeal to the pro-LGBTQ woke people and get the policies for the World Cup changed. He did not realize that that whole pose on Al Jazeera is just that. It's a pose, and it does not have any substance behind it. Islam is quite different, in fact. Indonesia. Now, this is an unusual dumb infidel story because Indonesia is a Muslim country. But I don't know how else to classify this, David. Very strange incident happened a few days ago, Tuesday. A woman was found carrying a gun outside the presidential palace in Jakarta. She was wearing a niqab and carrying a Quran in her other hand. So she's got a gun, she's got a Quran, she's wearing a niqab, and she's walking around outside the presidential palace. Now, there is one thing about Indonesia. They have a Sharia province, Aceh, but the rest of Indonesia is not Sharia compliant. And Joko Widodo, the president of Indonesia, which I'm sorry that he already got that name, because I would change my name to that in a minute. But Joko Widodo, he is not a Sharia ruler. He does not govern according to Sharia. So it seems to me pretty clear, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that she's the niqab, she has the gun, she has the Quran, she's outside the palace of a non-Sharia adherent president, Joko Widodo. I think I know what's going on, but the Indonesian cops are searching for her motive.
If it's got anything to do with Islam, go with mental illness.
I'm sure she'll be declared. If they're searching for her motive now, they will declare her mentally ill forthwith. Okay, let's go to Iran before we run out of time here, David. Interesting thing happened on Saturday. Hossein Salami, the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, he I was trying, but
I saw the twinkle in your eye. I knew you couldn't resist.
so, yes, well, he used to work with Sheikh Hussein Provolone, but anyway, they had an argument. Hossein Salami, he declared on Saturday, "Do not come to the streets. Today is the last day of the riots." It is now Wednesday, and the demonstrations are still going on. And so Sheikh Hossein Salami has been consumed.
It's eating him up.
I don't mean to be wry about this.
I mean, he feels sandwiched in by between all the stuff that's going on.
Yes, indeed. But he was wrong. He was going to crack down. But as we said last week, terror is all they got. And once they terrorize the population and the population refuses to be terrorized, then he doesn't have another sandwich.
Yeah, it's amazing that he thought that would work, though, right? Like, oh,
Yes.
guys, you all, rioting and protesting and everything else, and guys, just so you know, today's the last day of that.
Yep, it's all over.
Like everyone's, oh, okay, well, if he says so. I just shared a video yesterday. There are a bunch of these videos where it's becoming like the new thing in Iran to run up and knock off a cleric's turban off his head.
Yes, I saw that.
Seeing that over and over again. Clerics walking down the street, just women are running up behind him, knocking his hat off, and then his hat goes flying off his head, and then he struggles to get it back on. And at first I was, because even though I blast Islam pretty regularly, I'm not in favor of not messing with people's property or hitting them or anything else. So at first I was like, oh, come on, nice guy walking down the street, you're knocking his hat off. What's going on? But then and then I was thinking, I was like, gosh, these are the guys who are telling women what they have to wear on their heads, and they're making the calls that ultimately lead to these women getting beaten, raped, and murdered over what they're wearing on their heads. You know what? I don't care if they knock your hats off anymore, dudes, because you guys are some scumbags.
Well, you got a point there. I felt exactly the same way. These guys, they're not necessarily involved. But of course, even just by being Islamic clerics in Iran at this point, they're propping up this evil regime. And so to get their hat knocked off is a small thing. They should be happy that it's not something worse. And we can hope that they will lose their power and the regime will go before it gets to be something worse. Interesting thing happened in the city of Mahabad in Iran. The monument to the symbol of the Islamic Republic was destroyed by the people, by the protesters. I was just actually looking for the picture, but I couldn't find it right now, unfortunately. The symbol of the Islamic Republic is a stylized version of Allah written in Arabic. So it's a couple of the long lines, and then in the straight in the center, and then same thing on the other side. So it's kind of a bowl-shaped kind of thing with various ribs in it, and it's the symbol of the Islamic Republic of Iran. There is a statue of that kind in Iran and in Mahabad, but no longer. And so the protesters have thus made it quite clear that they really do not... Oh, there it is. They really do not... you can see there the symbol of the monument of the symbol of the Islamic Republic, spelling out Allah in Arabic, and the protesters up on the pedestal of the statue and proceeding to tear it down, indicating they do not want an Islamic Republic. This is not a protest for some kinder, gentler Islamic regime, but for no Islamic regime at all. Meanwhile, some of the people who are in the regime and their families are actually now fleeing to Britain, where they can live their Sharia existence comfortably.
Isn't that amazing? Because guys, you've never heard me complain about taking in immigrants in a non-insane way, right? Got no problem with immigration or anything else like that. But isn't it amazing that in every one of these cases, you'll have these two sides, and they're fighting usually because Islam is trying to control something, and whoever loses, the West has to take them all in because they're all going to be slaughtered by the side that wins. And then what you find is, because notice that the claims that we've been hearing for years is, Islam must be true because of its rapid growth. And so you could be talking about its growth globally or its growth in the West. If you're talking about its growth globally, that's massively due to high birth rates in Muslim countries and third world Muslim countries where they just have the highest birth rates. So that's the main cause for Islam growing rapidly. Whereas people in other countries, women start getting married and so on in their 20s or 25 and then start having kids and so on. Muslim girls are being married off by their families at, 12 and stuff like this. And by the time they're 25, they've got 5 or 6 kids already. And so you end up with high birth rates and, look, the religion is growing so rapidly. But then as far as Islam in the West, the primary factor is immigration from countries where they don't want to live, where they can't live normal lives anymore. And so they're just trying to get out of Muslim countries as fast as they can. And isn't it amazing that Islam just can't do a good job of making a country where anyone wants to live except for the oppressor?
Mm-hmm. And then they come over here and a lot of them try to recreate the same place they left.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? If anyone on the planet understands how messed up Islam is, it should be someone like Ilhan Omar, right? And she comes over here and what does she want? We need more Islam. We need to combat Islamophobia so Islam can continue marching on. Or like that guy we talked about, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, the guy who who had the 5 Pillars news site and hey, look at all the problems here in the UK. Is it time for an Islamic state? It's like, you guys can't get out of the Muslim world fast enough to come to a non-Muslim country. And then as soon as you get to a non-Muslim country, you know what this place needs? Islam.
Yep. And of course you're Islamophobic for opposing it. One of the reasons why people flee is another story out of Iran. A teenage girl, Parmis Hamnava, was at her school in Iranshar in the Sistan and Baluchistan province when security forces entered the school and they searched the textbooks of the students. They found a torn photo of Khomeini in Parmis Hamnava's book and beat her to death in front of the other students. This is, of course, designed to strike terror in the hearts of the enemies of Allah as per the Quran.
Torn picture. But these are the people who are the defenders of pure monotheism and don't idolize human beings, right?
That's right.
Hey, you know what would have been funny if she'd been like, if they're like, we found this torn picture and so we're gonna kill you, and she was like, what are you talking about? Pictures are haram. I'm doing what Muhammad said. Pictures are haram. An angel won't come into a place with a dog or a picture, so I'm just trying to keep the pathway for the angels clear.
Might
you guys
work.
are the ones who are,
But they're Shia, and so the Shia. I remember when we did the infamous Muhammad cartoon contest that ISIS attacked in Texas in 2015. Pamela and I and Bosch Foston and Geert Wilders was there, and ISIS was there, and the FBI was there on ISIS's side. Anyway, I had developed a whole lot of pictures of Muhammad that we had around the room, around the hall, for the event. And they included a lot of historical images, including several from Iran from hundreds of years ago, because Shia didn't think there was anything wrong with depicting Muhammad. It's a different situation with the Sunnis.
Yeah. So you got the passages in the Sunni hadiths. I mean, against images in general and so on. But yeah, I'm not familiar enough with like Al Kafi and so on to know what they say about images.
Yeah, I'm not either, but they certainly have had them with no trouble. And so it's a very different setting from what we're getting used to and complying with eagerly in the West. Meanwhile, David, speaking of bringing over Muslims coming over or being brought over to the West and then wanting to recreate the place they fled, story out of Austria, Halloween night in two cities in Austria, Linz and Salzburg. Linz being, of course, famous as the home of Adolf Hitler. And now it's famous again because it was one of the cities in which there were 200 to 300 migrants from Afghanistan and Syria, and they went into the city squares and began to riot while screaming. What do you think they were screaming, David?
I don't even need to break out the wheel for this one, but I'll go with Allahu Akbar.
Right again. Pretty amazing. I would have thought Happy Halloween, or something
this
in that
MAGA
nature.
country. This MAGA country.
Yeah. But in any case, they were out there rioting. Now there are people who are very angry in Austria because they say they want them deported. The government says they'll deport them. But the government has said many times they will deport them, and they will deport various foreign criminals, and they don't end up doing it. So we'll see what happens there. Their anger was multiplied by the rape of a 12-year-old by another Muslim migrant in a public toilet facility in Praterstern in Austria. And this has just enraged the people even more. But as we have discussed many times, his behavior also is in line with Islamic teaching, is it not, David?
Yep. Those whom your right hands possess.
Indeed. We have a couple stories out of Israel in the West Bank, originally known as Judea and Samaria. There was a vehicular jihad attack where a Muslim driver mowed down five Israeli soldiers. There was another one where a 50-year-old Israeli civilian was murdered, and then the Fatah group, which is part of the ruling party of the Palestinian Authority, said that he quoted the Quran and praised him as a hero and martyr. And I think it's interesting because, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is always spoken of in the West in solely political terms. But when you look at the actual statements of Palestinian Arabs themselves, they're invariably quoting the Quran and saying it's all about Islam. And yet that aspect of it is completely discounted by Western authorities.
And, I mean, it seems like it's built into, like, the Muslim leaders deep down, they understand that, because if it was at all about the people, then at some point you would just say, okay, let's absorb let's just get this out of the way, absorb the people into the rest of the populations of the rest of our countries, and that way they're nice and safe, and any sort of land disputes or something like that we can settle in the future. But no, they never want to do any of that. In fact, it's the opposite. It's like the lives of the people there are irrelevant considering it's part of, a bigger plan to eradicate and take over Israel again.
Indeed. So in Bethlehem, we have a church, actually near Bethlehem, in Beit Sahur, dozens of Muslim men hurled stones at the church, injuring a number of people. And Archbishop Atallah Hanna of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem, this was a Greek Orthodox church there in Beit Sahur. So Archbishop Atallah Hanna said that it was unprecedented. And I think I could think of a few precedents there, Archbishop. But anyway, he said, what happened on Friday night in Beit Sahur distorts the image of our people and harms civil peace and the good relationship that binds us as the sons of the Palestinian people. And I expect, he also said it was a horrific attack, and I expect he was indeed astonished, because the Palestinian Christians generally have the dhimmi mentality of going along with the Muslims and acting as if they are just as victimized by Israel and playing up the victimhood propaganda and so on, and essentially joining in to the jihad. But for that, they expect that they will be not attacked by the Muslims. And so now these dozens of Muslim men throwing stones at the Greek Orthodox Church, injuring a number of people, they've kind of broken the agreement.
Well, it's pretty similar to what we talked about last week with the political left aligning with Islam and thinking, since we always support you and anyone who criticizes jihad and terrorism, we call them Islamophobes, and we won't let anyone speak about Muhammad, we'll help you get them banned and so on. And in return, make sure you vote for us and support LGBTQ stuff. And then Muslims are like, what? No. So same situation. You think, because, we're getting along with you right now, therefore you're going to support us, and not realizing, hey, jihadis are all too happy to form temporary alliances with the understanding that they'll eventually wipe you out too.
Indeed. This is actually a jihad story and a stupid infidel story. One of the jihadis who attacked in Nice in France a few years back, killing 86 people, is on trial now. And his relatives showed up at the trial, the relatives of Mohammed Lahouaj Bouhlel, perpetrator of the attack, and they were laughing at the families of the victims who were there. And people are shocked, scandalized by this, and they say, this is terrible, they're adding insult to injury and so on. Why would they laugh, David?
I don't know, because it's amusing to them. Do you have something specific, or just?
Oh, just that. Yeah, it's amusing to them.
It's part of. I mean, it's all part of terrorizing them. Saw the exact same thing with like Yazidi women and so on who got out of Iraq after ISIS and went to places like Canada, and Muslims would find them online and just constantly be taunting them about being rape victims and so on. Mm-hmm. It's like you have to. It's not just, hey, we terrorized you when we want to continue ongoing forever terrorizing you and make this stuff stick in your head.
Yep, and also it's a manifestation of the contempt for the infidels, the idea of Muhammad being the apostle of Allah. Those who follow him are ruthless to the unbelievers, merciful to one another, and so on. There's a great deal more jihad, David. In Nigeria, there was a massacre of 70 Christians in a village, and increasing frustration with the government that does nothing. But of course, the jihadis are Fulanis, and Muhammad, what's his name, Buhari, is a Fulani, the Muhammadu Buhari, the president of Nigeria. So there may be a connection there. In Pakistan, Muslims fired guns toward the homes of Hindus to prevent them from celebrating Diwali. In Chechnya, interesting thing, the leader of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, has repeated that the Russian war against Ukraine is a great jihad. He said this is a great jihad everyone should take part in. That what they're trying to do is de-Satanize Ukraine. I think it's a very odd thing to characterize this fight between two infidel countries as a jihad, but it's one way to get Muslim recruits into the Russian army. I think on that note, we will have to wrap it up this week. David, do you think there'll be any necessity to have this show next week at all?
I don't know. I mean, based on what everyone says, it's such a tiny minority of extremists, and they keep catching them and locking these guys up. You think, well, there can't be any left, and yet they keep proving us wrong. So it's weird that so many people misunderstand this religion in the same exact way for so long.
It is weird. But in the unlikely event that it does happen next week, I expect we'll be around. But most likely it's all over with, and the hijacking and twisting of Islam is over. So have some champagne, folks, and celebrate that. And this week in Jihad is done. David, thank you very much. And good night, everyone. God bless.
Been a good run.
Indeed.